What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and we got to get ready to start targeting some people on our waiver wire for Week 5. Week 4 was another crazy week. We had some more injuries to some top shelf guys. Obviously, we had the issues with COVID. The Saints player testing positive and being okay. Tennessee finally looking like they're on the outskirts of their outbreak. Kansas City and New England was an issue as well. They're going to end up getting their game in. But it just goes to show us and remind us that 2020 is a really crazy season and we have to prepare for everything. I saw a lot of fantasy commissioners saying, well, we're going to be adding some bench spots, some IR spots, and things like that. So that might be skewing some of the numbers right now, and your waiver wires might be really thin because of that. Keep in mind, on this video, you have to be less than 50% owned across the industry. So we take a look at multiple platforms, and if you're less than 50% owned, you're eligible for this video. So some of these guys may already be taken if you play in a super deep league. If you don't, you can probably still get your hands on some of these guys. But we got to jump into it and discuss who you should be targeting for your waiver wire pickups this week. And as always, we're going to kick it off with running backs. When talking about running backs, it's hard not to realize that Chris Carson is seriously banged up right now, and so is Carlos Hyde. So someone may need to step up in Week 5 and take over that role as lead back in Seattle. And my pick to do that is going to be DJ Dallas, and I'm going to go with him over Travis Homer because DJ Dallas, to me, is the more complete running back. DJ Dallas is a guy, he can be a 3-down guy. He can be out there for run plays. He can be out there for pass protection. He can be out there to run routes. Travis Homer is a little bit more one-dimensional. And even though he scored a touchdown last week, I think DJ Dallas is a little bit more of a complement to that offense and what they're trying to do every single play. So when you have a guy like that on your roster, you may utilize him a little bit more. We have to keep an eye on Chris Carson at this point and see what happens with him heading into Week 5. But if you're looking to replace him or add some depth, DJ Dallas is the guy that if Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde were to miss next week, he is the guy that I think gets the most touches and the most snaps in that backfield. For Cleveland, Dearness Johnson, after the Nick Chubb injury, came out and played really well and saw a lot of touches in Week 4. Will he be great moving forward? Probably not. But again, if you're a Nick Chubb owner or if you're worried about depth or whatever it may be, Dearness Johnson is the guy that you want to add from Cleveland. 0% owned right now, so not really anybody worrying about him. But he's going up against Indianapolis, so he's going to have a tough matchup next week, and I don't expect to see him get nearly as many touches as we did last week. Kareem Hunt's going to be the guy. He's going to be getting a lot of carries on the ground, a lot of targets. Kareem Hunt at this point is really likely a top 5 back, even going up against Indianapolis. But if something were to happen, like we've seen with a lot of other players this week or this year, and Kareem Hunt were to miss any time, then Dearness Johnson looks to be next in line as the lead back in Cleveland. Chase Edmonds, 6.7% owned. He was a pretty popular late round draft pick in the early part of the draft season because people were wondering about Kenyon Drake. And then we heard that, well, maybe these are guys that we can use together. And Cliff Kingsbury wasn't really committal to saying that Kenyon Drake was going to be a guy that saw the majority of the touches. And even though Kenyon Drake has been the guy that's been getting a majority of the touches so far, he's not really doing a whole lot with them. So maybe we need to start taking a look at Chase Edmonds, who had 6 targets this past week, as being the guy that's really going to help in the passing game. And if they try to continue to give Kenyon Drake a little bit more volume and he just doesn't do anything with it, we could see Chase Edmonds build up that volume on his end and maybe start to take over as lead back. If you're a Kenyon Drake owner, I would go get Chase Edmonds right away. Stash him, keep him on your roster just in case. If you're in a deeper league and you need help at running back, you could add Chase Edmonds because even in a PPR league, we could be getting to a point where he may end up having stand-alone value. We haven't seen like a number 2 target really break out there in Arizona. It's been, Andy Isabel last week. Larry Fitzgerald hasn't really done anything. Christian Kirk, decent week, but he's been basically quiet all season long. So maybe Chase Edmonds does start to work into a little bit of a pass-catching role and see some targets that would typically go to a wide receiver too that as of right now are kind of being spread out all over the place. Joshua Kelly for the Chargers. Now, more than likely, he's going to be owned in a lot of leagues for many of you listening. But after a stinker of a performance last week and seeing that Austin Eckler was really on the climb again, a lot of people gave up on him because a couple of weeks ago, Joshua Kelly was like 55-60% owned in leagues. Now he's all the way down to 31% owned. We know that at this point, Austin Eckler is going to be missing quite a bit of time. If you have a number 1 waiver wire, number 2, whatever it may be, I'm burning whatever waiver wire I have on Joshua Kelly right now. Is he going to be Austin Eckler like? Probably not. Okay. Austin Eckler is, he's a beast. Okay. Not too many people are going to step on the field and be exactly what Austin Eckler has been for the Chargers. But Kelly's going to be a really good fill-in. And if you need help at running back, if you had Eckler, whatever it may be, you're not going to see too many guys get as much volume as Kelly moving forward. So he should be at the top of your list if you're needing to add a running back this week. And then finally, Keyshawn Vaughn from Tampa Bay. Leonard Fournette missed this past week, and Ronald Jones looked really good. He had 9 targets in the passing game. Yeah, he dropped 3 of them, but he caught the 6 others, and he had over 100 yards on the ground. Ronald Jones finally got a chance to show what he could do as a lead back, and he did it. But that doesn't matter because Keyshawn Vaughn still saw some red zone opportunities and even saw some passes, including a touchdown catch in the red zone. So Keyshawn Vaughn at 3.8% owned going up against Chicago, you might want to be taking a look at him as well. Because even though Ronald Jones had a good game, we know he dropped 3 passes. And at any point in time, Tom Brady could say, no, I need to have somebody else out here. So we're going to keep an eye on Vaughn. Really low percentage owned right now because after all the offseason hype, he just hasn't done anything. But we need to get him back on our radar. Depending on how much time Leonard Fournette may miss, we'll keep an eye on that as too. I wouldn't burn a top waiver wire ad on Vaughn, but he is definitely a guy to be keeping our eye on. Moving on to wide receiver, and one of my favorite players that I have been hoping for a breakout is Tre'Quan Smith. And it took Michael Thomas missing some time for that to happen. But after a couple touchdown passes against Detroit, Tre'Quan Smith is really starting to show what he can do as a wide receiver. And I absolutely love it. Now, Tre'Quan Smith is a pickup with no Michael Thomas. Going up against the Chargers next week, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Thomas. If you're a late round waiver edition, okay, if you've got one of those back end waiver editions and you need help at wide receiver, Tre'Quan Smith is still touchdown upside every single week. Heck, in standard leagues, he's a guy that I wouldn't mind starting as a wide receiver 3 or maybe even a flex because he does have that touchdown upside every single week. I just don't know if we'll see very much volume when Michael Thomas comes back. So don't spend a whole lot of fab on him. Don't burn a top waiver priority, but keep him on your radar. Add him in leagues that are deeper, only 1% owned right now. Probably going to shoot up this week, especially after the 2 touchdown performance. A guy that came up in one of my videos a couple of weeks ago, Isaiah Ford for Miami, 0.1% owned right now, and really feels to me he's kind of starting to establish himself as that number 2 wide receiver on this team. Now, really, Isaiah Ford for me is a PPR ad. If you're in a league that is PPR, I'm okay with this because if he's getting enough targets and receptions in PPR leagues, he could sneak into being a 10 or 11 point addition to your lineup every single week, even if he doesn't have the touchdowns. In standard and half, I'm a little bit more hesitant with it. Now, Miami's offense this past week, it didn't look great, but Isaiah Ford working out of the slot for a majority of his touches, there's something to be said about what he could potentially do volume-wise. Preston Williams hasn't done anything at this point. Mike Gesicki is really up and down. Devontae Parker is really the only guy that you can trust on that offense every single week to go out there and get you a decent amount of catches and yards. So Isaiah Ford over the next few weeks might start to really add himself as that number 2 pass catcher there. And again, in PPR leagues, he could be double-digit fantasy points a week in your flex or wide receiver 3 spot. And honestly, with the way the landscape looks right now, that's really not that bad. Our number 3 target this week, T. Higgins from Cincinnati. Still only 13% owned, which really caught me off guard. I didn't think I was going to be able to add T. Higgins to this video, but then I looked, 13% owned. Oh, baby. Let's take a shot at T. Higgins this week. He's the wide receiver 2 there now in Cincinnati, a team that's passing the ball more than enough to make him a suitable option as a wide receiver 3 moving forward. He's getting red zone targets. He's getting volumes. Heck, he's getting snaps. Over the last couple of weeks, and snap percentage, he's number 2 on that team behind Tyler Boyd at wide receiver. So they definitely see him as being the next big option for Joe Burrow there, and they have really established a connection. He's pushed old man A.J. Green to the side, and T. Higgins is now the wide receiver 2. And again, they're passing more than enough that you can put him in your lineup weekly, and more than likely he'll be a start with the exception of next week. Not really sure if I'm going to start him against Baltimore Baltimore. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper on that. And of course, I'll let you know on the start sit videos that will start dropping over the next couple of days. But for me right now, we're still going to add him because even against Baltimore, we still got to stash him this week, especially with the performance that he's coming off of. Scotty Miller from Tampa Bay. Chris Godwin's going to be out for a while. Scotty Miller, we really thought a couple of weeks ago, not us, we as in the fantasy headliners, we were a little bit more cautious with it. But the landscape as a whole, the fantasy industry thought Scotty Miller a couple of weeks ago was the bang play. Okay, no Chris Godwin being out. We thought Scotty Miller, he is going to just mash this week. It didn't happen. But last week he comes back and he has an excellent game being that wide receiver 2 to Mike Evans. And Mike Evans is also beat up right now. So there's a connection between Tom Brady and Scotty Miller. Scotty Miller down to 11% owned, going up against Chicago this next week. Go ahead and run out and grab Scotty Miller, especially if you're a Chris Godwin owner. He's going to see more than enough volume. And even if Mike Evans plays, even if he's a little bit more banged up, we could see Tom Brady looking to Scotty Miller a little bit more often. Jalen Guyton, kind of a deeper stash right now because Mike Williams is injured, going up against New Orleans next week, 0% owned. He's kind of the deep threat right now for this team. And we saw this past weekend, Herbert has the arm to go down the field. Guyton only had one reception for like 79 yards and it was a touchdown, but that doesn't mean that they don't start working him into the game plan a little bit more to be that deep threat to help space out the field a little bit more. And obviously with Austin Eckler being gone, we could see some more targets going to Guyton and the other wide receivers, tight ends as well, and that could make Guyton fantasy viable. So for those of you in deeper leagues, grab up Guyton right now and see what happens with Mike Williams and his injury over the next couple of weeks. And then Cole Beasley, okay, he's got a case of the Beasles right now, thanks to our very own Chris Chouse, who drew out some projections. All three of the main wide receivers in Buffalo right now are going over 1,000 yards based on current projections over the first couple of weeks and spacing that out the rest of the season. Cole Beasley is a guy in PPR leagues. He's 100% a flex option every single week right now, 29% owned. Maybe not necessarily a deeper stash. Again, if he's 29% owned right here, he's probably a little bit more owned across the fantasy landscape for deeper leagues and a little bit more of competitive leagues. But if he's available in your league and you need help going up against Tennessee next week, it sounds like that game may end up being on. They've had no new positive tests in Tennessee over the last 24 hours. If that continues to hold true, they can open up their facilities on Wednesday and still play next Sunday. And heck, they may even decide to push the game back a couple of days to give Tennessee an extra couple of days. But we'll see how that works out. But Cole Beasley, another guy to add for wide receiver this week. So far this season, I have not bought in to the Dallas tight end, and I've officially thrown that out the door, and I'm saying, okay, let's buy in on Dalton Schultz every single week. Part of the reason that I wasn't buying in on the tight end is because I was absolutely positive that the majority of the targets would be split up between Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. But Michael Gallup is getting left outside in the rain right now. I mean, Dak puts up over 500 yards yesterday, and Michael Gallup was a smidgen of that. Dalton Schultz is really that number 3 target right now. 3 or 4. It depends on what you consider Zeke to be, because Zeke is still getting a lot of targets as well. But Dalton Schultz, because of how much the Cowboys have to throw, getting more than enough volume. Now, next week, going up against the Giants, maybe they don't have to throw it nearly as much, but Schultz is still seeing a lot of looks. So if you're desperate for a tight end right now, let's add Dalton Schultz, because I'm officially on the bandwagon, ladies and gentlemen. It took me long enough, but apparently Michael Gallup doesn't mean necessarily as much to this offense as we saw last season. And then Cameron Brate for Tampa Bay. Rob Gronkowski is really going to be the guy, but he's over 50% owned. He's still around 68% right now. A lot of people really haven't given up on him. But O.J. Howard, who's continued to make his way out onto the field, he's done for the season with an Achilles injury. Cameron Brate comes in. He scores a touchdown last week, 0.1% owned. Again, if you're looking for desperation at tight end, Cameron Brate, you could do a whole lot worse, because more than likely we're still going to see him and Rob Gronkowski on the field together quite a bit. And keep in mind, just said, Mike Evans, he's a little banged up right now. So Cameron Brate, who has typically been a red zone weapon for Jameis Winston in the past, could become that red zone weapon for Tom Brady for the rest of the season. All right, we're moving on to the streaming portion of our video now. We're going to talk about quarterbacks and defensive special teams. And I've got 3 quarterbacks we can look at streaming next week. Teddy Bridgewater, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones. Now, Daniel Jones is a little bit more risky because that offense hasn't looked good even against bad opponents, but he is going up against Dallas, a team that continues to get lit up and was absolutely destroyed on the defensive side of the ball by the Cleveland Browns last week. OBJ having a big week, Baker Mayfield looking good, the running backs having another big week. Jarvis Landry out there looking like a QB throwing that TD pass. Daniel Jones is a little bit more risky. For me, I'm looking at Teddy Bridgewater and Kirk Cousins. Teddy Bridgewater's looked fantastic this year. My concerns about him pushing the ball down the field, he's definitely looking at those and saying, Kyle, get out of here with that. And he's looking fine. So going up against Atlanta, a team that really can't stop anybody, and again with Seattle and Kirk Cousins, those two teams are really at the top in terms of allowing fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks right now. So if you're going to need a quarterback next week, you need to stream. Again, we're getting into the bye weeks right now. Green Bay, Detroit, the first two up. If you need to stream somebody, if you have any injuries, if you were anticipating Cam Newton, whatever it may be, Teddy Bridgewater and Kirk Cousins are both a couple of guys because of their matchup could be pretty safe. And Kirk Cousins, who's been up and down, Justin Jefferson's looking really good and stepping up as that number 2 wide receiver. That's going to help Kirk Cousins quite a bit. So we'll be back on Kirk Cousins for another week. Probably won't have him super high in the rankings. But again, if you're looking for a streaming option, him and Teddy Bridgewater are the two that you definitely want to take a look at first. All right, I'm only really going after a couple of defensive special teams this week that are around 25 to 30% owned, being Arizona and Dallas. Arizona with not a great showing last week, but they're going to be going up against the New York Jets. So that always has its ramifications, especially considering we don't really know if Sam Darnold's going to miss time or not. They haven't really said, yes, he's going to be out or no, he's going to play. So as of right now with Sam Darnold looking like he's got a little bit of a shoulder issue, we could see a backup QB there in Joe Flacco, who, it's Joe Flacco, right? Joe Flacco hasn't looked good in a few years. So getting Arizona going up against the Jets, who are dealing with a ton of injuries, could end up being very fruitful for you next week. And if you want to risk it, you could go with Dallas. The Giants have not looked good at all. Golden Tate could end up being suspended after that brawl on the field. There could be other guys that are suspended as well. Okay, the NFL made it clear that they wanted guys to be careful after the game, and that probably doesn't bode well for these two teams, knowing that they got into a little bit of fisticuffs and all gathered in the middle of the field to throw some punches for a while. So there could be some suspensions handed down pretty soon as well. So maybe Dallas is going to be facing a New York Giants offense that is even more depleted next week because they've looked so bad. People are going to be passing on them. But if you really need to stream next week, Dallas might be a little bit of a risky option that you could roll with. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Some of my top recommendations for you to hit the waiver wire this week. Make sure you're doing so as well, okay? Don't wait till the last minute, not with everything going on. 2020 has been insane. This year, more than ever, you have to be vigilant as a fantasy football owner. You have to take your team into your own hands. And even though we've had a lot of bad luck, and each week is really crazy, and you'll have to have some luck to win this season, if you don't do your part, it's going to get really bad really quick. So continue to be out there, working the waiver wire, looking at trades, things of that nature. Going to try and do maybe another trade show this week coming up. So we'll see if we can get another one of those out. But Headliner Nation, again, here are some recommendations for you to be targeting. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below if you appreciate the content. If you got questions about somebody that wasn't mentioned on the video, ask me down below. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And as always, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Headliners, appreciate you all. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.